The presence of the USS Nimitz alone signals serious intent. But it's not alone. The USS Carl Vinson, another supercarrier, is already stationed nearby. Having two of these massive war machines in the region at the same time is rare and ominous. Military analysts see this as a precursor to full-scale U.S. involvement. Each carrier brings hundreds of aircraft and guided missile destroyers, capable of offensive and defensive action at sea, in the air, and on land. These strike groups are strategic weapons, providing the U.S. and its allies overwhelming superiority. Their air wings can intercept enemy aircraft, dominate contested airspace, or strike Iranian targets deep within its territory. Their surveillance systems can detect missile launches and provide early warnings for preemptive defense. While the carriers draw most of the attention, they're not the only assets being deployed. A large fleet of aerial refueling tankers, over 30 KC-135s and KC-46s, was recently spotted moving from U.S. and global bases toward Europe and the Middle East. These aircraft don't attack directly, but they enable others to stay airborne longer, travel farther, and carry heavier payloads. Their movement was unannounced, and analysts could find no link to any training mission or exercise. It's strategic positioning, plain and simple, setting the stage for extended aerial operations. Tankers like these make sustained air campaigns possible, allowing U.S. aircraft to remain over Iranian airspace without constantly returning to base for fuel. Recent days have also seen an uptick in U.S. destroyer activity. The USS Thomas Hudner, USS Arleigh Burke, and USS the Sullivans have all arrived in the eastern Mediterranean. These ships are already taking action, firing missile interceptors to defend Israel. On land, Patriot missile systems and possibly THAAD units are being deployed. The U.S. is building a comprehensive, multi-layered defense posture, and it's not just for show. A potential U.S. war with Iran is quickly shifting from an unlikely scenario to a likely outcome. All signs are pointing toward an imminent American military entry into the escalating conflict. The only real question now seems to be when, not if. The clock is ticking. For months, President Donald Trump has tried to keep the U.S. out of direct confrontation. Since taking office earlier this year, he's repeatedly pushed for peaceful resolutions, especially between Israel and Iran. Trump even attempted to broker a new nuclear deal with Tehran, insisting it abandon its nuclear ambitions. In speeches and public statements, he called for a peaceful Middle East and urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to hold back. But the tide has shifted dramatically. On June 13th, Israel took matters into its own hands. Operation Rising Lion was launched, with strikes on Tehran and other key locations. The war officially began. The U.S. initially distanced itself. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the attack unilateral and denied U.S. involvement, while also warning Iran not to target American interests or personnel. But just days later, everything changed. The United States is no longer talking about diplomacy. It's preparing for war. That shift became glaringly obvious with the sudden movement of major U.S. military assets into the region, including the USS Nimitz, one of the world's largest and most powerful aircraft carriers. The Nimitz, which was scheduled for retirement in 2026, is now arriving months ahead of schedule. It's escorted by a full strike group, destroyers, submarines, and Carrier Air Wing 17, which includes FA-18F Super Hornets, MH-60S Seahawks, and EA-18G Growlers, all primed for combat. This force isn't just symbolic, it's lethal. Further evidence comes from U.S. military aid being diverted from Ukraine to the Middle East. On June 9, Ukrainian President Zelensky confirmed that 20,000 anti-drone missiles originally bound for his country had been rerouted. It's likely those are now being used to protect Israeli cities from Iranian attacks. Even the U.S. State Department is issuing warnings that suggest something bigger is coming. A June 16 advisory urged all U.S. citizens in Iran to leave immediately or prepare for extended shelter-in-place scenarios. It stated, U.S. citizens should not travel to Iran for any reason and should depart Iran immediately if they are there. That's not a typical travel warning. That's the kind of alert that precedes war. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth added to the tension by announcing the deployment of additional capabilities to the region, reinforcing that protecting U.S. forces was the top priority. Meanwhile, President Trump made headlines after abruptly leaving the G7 summit. French President Macron claimed it was to negotiate a ceasefire, but Trump denied it. On Truth Social, he wrote, "Much bigger than that. Stay tuned." He then posted a blunt warning to Iranians. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. This message wasn't vague. It was a call for civilians to flee a war zone. The implication is chilling. A major strike, either by Israel or the U.S., could be imminent. Israel followed up with its own message, warning that military operations in Tehran would continue and advising civilians to leave. Diplomacy is still on the table, barely. Tehran has reached out to regional powers, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia, asking them to mediate with the U.S. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi appealed directly to Trump via social media, stating that Washington has the power to stop Netanyahu and end the war. Araghchi made one thing crystal clear. If the aggression doesn't stop, Iran will keep fighting. He warned that involving the U.S. directly would ignite unfathomable consequences for the region and the global economy. Still, he left the door open, saying Iran didn't start this war and doesn't want more bloodshed. But it will defend itself to the last drop. This moment is a crossroads, with American assets moving into position, rhetoric hardening, and forces being deployed at an unprecedented scale. A U.S. entry into the war appears all but certain. Supercarriers, tankers, destroyers, and interceptors don't move without reason. The U.S. is no longer on the sidelines. It's staging for action. So why now? Why is the U.S. willing to risk another large-scale war? Part of the answer lies in failed diplomacy. Trump recently admitted his hopes for a deal with Iran were fading. In a podcast interview on June 11th, he said, "I'm getting more and more less confident about it." He accused Iran of stalling and dragging its feet. Then there's the nuclear issue. The U.S. has consistently stated it will not allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Trump reiterated this position recently, saying, "Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again." That's not just a red line, it's a trigger. Iran's refusal to fully comply with inspections or halt enrichment has pushed the U.S. closer to military action. Finally, geopolitics plays a role. A strong show of force in the Middle East helps Trump domestically and internationally. It sends a message to rivals like China and Russia, while reaffirming the U.S. commitment to regional allies like Israel. For Trump, striking Iran could be a political move as much as a military one. What happens next could shape the global order for years. A direct U.S.-Iran conflict wouldn't be limited to missiles and jets. It would ripple across oil markets, alliances, and the balance of power in the Middle East. The next few days may determine if this remains a proxy conflict or erupts into a full-blown war with devastating consequences.